Hi everybody, Councillor Dave Lane here with the City of St. John's, and I'd like to talk to you today about Budget 2021 and give you some background and context. So let's take a look at 2020. Snowmageddon obviously kicked off our year, and by February or so we knew that this was going to cost us about $7 million. That's primarily because we had to do so much snow removal that's different from a normal year. But then, of course, shortly thereafter, COVID-19 reared its head, and together we're looking at about $18.5 million deficit for this budget. So we announced the 2020 budget that we forecast a year ago, and now the actual numbers that are coming out of that are going to be impacted heavily by those two events, and we're still assessing that number of 18 million, but we are going to be able to cover that, and part of the way we're doing that is through government support that we've already been announced we'll receive. It's $6.4 million, which is excellent. As well, we've had surpluses in previous budgets. We often will use that to pay down debt if we have a surplus, and that saves us on interest and gets the debt paid off sooner. But this year, obviously, we've had a bit of a crisis. We're also hoping to get some extra disaster relief funding for Snowmageddon, so that would help with that 18 million as well. But the bottom line is that we can cover the cost of 2020, remembering, of course, that municipalities in Newfoundland and Labrador can't run a deficit. So when we have a deficit, we have to find a way to pay it and balance our budget. Now, 2021 is going to be impacted by COVID-19. The thing is, though, is that we're not exactly sure how it's going to be impacted. We know the areas where we expect to see some challenges, but it leads to a very uncertain year. So what our best estimate is we think our deficit is going to be from $10 to $12 million. And this will be impacted by a few of the examples I have there. Business closures and people working from home mean that there are likely more vacancies in the city, and we have a vacancy allowance on our property tax for commercial properties because we used to have a business occupancy tax and a property tax. So we have an ability for property owners to get an allowance if they don't have anyone in the building, even though they're trying to have it filled. Now, unemployment is up. We all know this, and people are struggling, and government programs can only go so far. So we're anticipating some people to struggle more than normally to be able to pay their taxes, including businesses. So we don't know if that revenue is going to be reliable. And of course, we have our own programs that we provide that generate revenue, and those are things like our recreation programs, the parking meters, etc. And we've already seen those programs have to be canceled because of COVID, etc. And we need to see what that's going to look like next year. And now we all know as well that travel and tourism has just been decimated by the pandemic. And we actually have a source of revenue. It's called the accommodation tax, and we use that to pay down the debt that was used to build the convention center. So if we don't have that revenue coming in from people being in hotel rooms, we have to cover that somehow. And finally, on the list is event cancellations. I mean, we're talking about big events that bring people together, and we're not allowed to do that right now. It's very unsafe. So when we look at the revenue we generally get from Convention Center Mile 1, it means that we may have to increase, or will have to increase, the subsidy. Now, you may have heard that St. John's Sports and Entertainment have taken some actions. They've had to lay off some folks to try and recover some costs and obviously adjust to the reality of fewer events, not needing as many people. So we're seeing all these things. But we actually go even further than 2021 when we're trying to budget, and we were already looking at 2022 as some adjustments to the economy and the impact on property values. So property values are important in how we budget because we multiply the value of your property by the mill rate that we've set in order to get the revenue that covers the budget. And given the economy, even before the pandemic, we know, or we're quite certain, that property values are going to go down. Now, the challenge there is that not all properties change in the same way. So we already saw for 2019 budget that higher value homes, bigger homes, had actually gone down in value, whereas smaller homes, which more people were buying as the economy changed, were actually going up. And we can only set one mill rate. So people are impacted by a mill rate change disproportionately. And we're very conscientious about how we adjust the mill rate. So as we see the property values go down, that's revenue, a number that's going down as well. We have to adjust for. But we also have, looking at the cost of borrowing changing. We do borrow for capital works in the millions of dollars. We have collective agreements with our workers, obviously, and right now we have all zeros for the years of the current agreement. Not sure how long that can last. And of course, obviously, we need to be maintaining our infrastructure. That's our underground pipes, our roads, etc. And if they break, that costs more than had we maintained it ahead of time. So we're constantly ensuring that we be on top of our infrastructure maintenance. But we have a changing city. We have demands of the public. You know, we want better services, or to have new programs, and that's a pressure to spend money as well. So 22 and beyond is definitely another challenge. So these are big numbers. Looking at 2020 and 21 and beyond, these are millions of dollars, and it's serious decisions that have to be made to see how we're going to cover those costs. So we're making very, very challenging decisions. And so we've worked very hard over the past really 6 months to craft a budget that offers some stability and support and really some certainty of some kind for people in 2021 as we look forward to see what's going to happen with other waves of the virus, or if the vaccine, how that's distributed. And that's what we had in mind as we went through the process here. So what was that process? Well, we began talking at Council very early on. I mentioned that the pandemic began really to rear its head in March, and we had a lot of conversations. We started to get a sense of what this is going to mean in April, and so we sat down formally in May once we knew the impact of Snowmageddon in terms of numbers, and we had done that assessment of COVID, and we said, what are we going to do for 21? And so by June, we'd had those conversations, and we directed our senior staff from across the entire organization, including St. John Sports and Entertainment and Metrobus, to identify efficiencies and cuts. And we were looking at a deficit that could range from $12 to $19 million. And so that was the number we asked them to come back with across numerous departments. And just to give you some sense of what it's like to find that kind of money, so we were just say it was $12 million. $13 million is what we found after the program review we did in 2017, and we did that by obviously making changes in the way we do things, but we had to reduce staffing by about 75 full-time equivalents, and we've since implemented a continuous improvement program. So we are, in a formal way, constantly looking for better ways of doing things, which can hopefully lead to savings as well. So in other words, we very much have cut the fat out of the operating budget of the City of St. John's. So any cut we make now is going to be felt in some way or another by the public. The cuts we've tried to do, if they're internal, say, it still means they might be felt internal. You might not notice they happened, but maybe things take a bit longer, or maybe we're not pursuing as many forward-looking initiatives because we just don't have the capacity to do so. So in any case, by early September, this report of what we could cut for 21 was presented to Council, and we spent the next 2 months meeting extremely often, 2 to 3 times a week. The meetings were 2 to 3 hours long to decide, let's look at this list. What's palatable? What could we consider? And then what is simply not acceptable based on what we understand from our constituents. And now, because they're such important decisions, the question obviously is, well, what about public engagement? We've done great public engagement in the past. And there's a couple of reasons why we didn't have an extensive public engagement process for this. And the first one really comes down to the fact that, this is such an uncertain year, and, the decisions and discussions that we were making are very sensitive. So to be putting out all of the options in very real terms, not just, general terms of what we would like to have, is like specific, almost individuals that we're considering cutting. It involves layoffs, and we want to be sensitive to that. That can cause a great deal of disruption, not just in the organization, but in the public, as we don't know what we're going to decide. And so because of the complexity there, it actually took a long time for us to come to that final list of actions and cuts and fees that we were going to do. And we want to inform those staff that we were letting them go before we made those announcements public, which we did on November 18th. So, we still were considering engagement that we had done previously. So this is the third in the 3-year budget cycle. So we had already engaged on what the next 3 years would be, and we went back to what we had done for 2019, and that informed the decisions we were making. Obviously, as well, there's been lots and lots of discussions with individuals, with advocacy groups. There's been a lot of media, obviously, over the past year, as well as social media discussions, and then obviously councillors discussing with their constituents. We have a very good sense of where people are in the community, and it doesn't make the decisions any easier, but it certainly means that they are informed by what the public are feeling and thinking. So, given all that information, everything we've gone through, what did we decide we wanted to achieve? What was our objective? And where we landed was that we wanted to have what you could call a hold-the-line budget. Let's get us through 2021 after this difficult year, into this uncertain year. And how do we do that? Well, we can cut programs, as I've mentioned, or services, we can increase fees, or we can increase the mill rate. And ultimately what we decided is that we wanted to find a solution that involved no mill rate increase. And that's because such an economic strain in the community, this is not something we wanted to add to, certainly from a financial perspective. And really, when we talk about uncertainty, what do I mean by that? It means that we don't know how much revenue we're going to get. If the vaccine is very successful and then public health restrictions are loosened and people all of a sudden feel comfortable flying again, we could have an uptick in the revenue that we didn't expect. Or things could get worse and we just will have to spend more for disaster recovery. I mean, really, we could have another snowmageddon, dare I say it. So we want to be in a position where we've made a prudent set of decisions that do not add financial impact to the residents, and that we decided to achieve that by doing a combination of program cuts, fee increases, which I'll announce on December 7th, and a portion of those remaining surplus funds that I mentioned near the beginning of the presentation. Now, it's not going to be all of the surplus funds. We still need to prepare for potential emergencies. And we do have reserve funds, for example, for the snow clearing fund, if we go well over, and we certainly went into that last year. And I should note as well that part of the approach to holding the line here means that we're generally refraining from enhancing existing service levels or adding new services. And that's because they cost money, and we don't know if we're going to be able to pay for them or how we would pay for them. But these are things that we could certainly explore as we look to the 2022 budget. Now, people have asked the question, why not increase taxes? We certainly, for a couple of issues in particular that have been discussed publicly, people have said, I'm perfectly willing to pay more tax if you increase this service. And that is a fair question, absolutely. And we talk a lot about that. But at the end of the day, we're fairly confident that the majority of our residents and business owners do not want a tax increase, and many couldn't withstand one. We did a citizen satisfaction survey, so that's a statistically reliable survey of opinions and perspectives, and only about 22%, between 22 and 30, I think, would be willing to have a tax increase in order to cover the cost of a deficit. Now remember, this question was asked in 2018, and times were very different then, so we expect that that number is probably a lot lower. A lot fewer people would be happy with a tax increase due to the economic situation, certainly not for 2021 at least. And in fact, to add to that, prior to the pandemic and the supports that were coming from government, we had actually begun to see a rise in people asking for assistance with paying their taxes. So, taxation is important, and it's significant to a lot of people, particularly the business community. We know for sure that they do not want a tax increase. They were hit a bit harder than residents by the budget in 2019, and especially now with health restrictions, people can't go into stores. They're not going out as much. Some stores aren't allowed to have as many customers, which means they're struggling to even get through the hard times. We don't want to add to that risk. So one final point I can make on that is actually by not increasing the mill rate, by using the supports that we've received from other levels of government, and by using surpluses of taxpayer money from previous years, this is our way of giving that money back and saying we're not going to raise taxes. We're going to use the money you gave us to cover off this exceptional year. So that's the general overview. I told you about the context we're in, which we all basically understood. We talked about the process that Council followed to make some decisions that were obviously very challenging, and then why we came to the solution we did, which was to make some cuts, to increase some fees, and to cover the rest with surplus, which I'm going to announce the details of on Budget Day on December 7th. But that said, there's still an opportunity to talk. We're still making tweaks, I can tell you right now, and we'll probably be doing it almost up to the last minute before we announce the budget. And that final budget announcement will be made by me on December 7th at our public meeting. And the public meeting starts at 3 p.m. and you can watch it live actually on the city's website, www.stjohns.ca, or it's recorded and it's put up afterward. This is the same for all meetings, by the way, all public meetings, so you can check that out. And I know some of you may have tuned into this particular video hoping to hear about specific issues that have been discussed in the media. I will speak to those issues more directly in the live session that I mentioned. That's taking place on Thursday, December 3rd. The details will be announced today, Monday, when I'm recording this later in the afternoon on the city's website and in social media, and we'll try and get the media that covered as well. There'll be a link there that you can pop onto. I encourage you to share your questions, concerns with us prior to that day so that we can kind of get the sense of the themes and make sure that I'm answering all the key questions that people have. But there will be an opportunity in that session to ask a question live. And of course, now I mentioned the years ahead, and we are going to have a serious discussion about what does 2022 and beyond look like. So we are intending on beginning engagement early in 2021 as we look forward there. So you can look forward to that. So thank you very much for taking the time to watch this video. Thank you very much for your interest in the decision-making process for your budget. And I look forward to chatting with you again on December 3rd. Thanks.